So when I begin each week, I always try to come up with a clever title. I don't know why I started doing that because now it's sort of like the tyranny of coming up with a clever title each week. I really wanted this week. I've shared this last week in California. This is my all-time favorite title slide that I did. I worked a lot on that, and I'm not very good at Photoshop yet, so I was actually going to try to update that this week a little bit, but I just was trying to learn some different things with Photoshop, and I've tried to incorporate some of that in my slides today. We talk about the convergence of events. And I talked a few times in California, about 5 or 6 times in California, traveling back and forth, met a lot of really great people, had a good time at the One of Messiah conference. And I think this week is probably maybe going to be shorter than usual just because I'm trying to get caught up I'm trying to get recovered. I know, we'll see if I'm a prophet or not, right? But I've often said, somebody said, just stand up there with your phone and go through your news feed. And I'm going to do a little bit of that today because I just didn't have time to put it in the slide. It's interesting that we live in this world where, this is from a few years ago in foreign policy, a world disrupted. Even secular people are trying to figure out what's going on. And foreign policy's current magazine cover is, can we fix this? And the answer is not. So let's just look at a few things that are going on. And I've tried not to repeat what I said in California, but I'm not sure that I accomplished that in going through my slides. I often, Friday I get like, man, I am so far ahead. And then about 10 minutes ago, it's like I'm so far behind. Oh, I forgot to do a title. And somebody's bugging me for a title back there, so in a nice way. This is interesting. I think I might have mentioned when I was in California, Pam and I had virtually all of our credit cards hacked. And so we're out there in California, and we're getting phone calls from credit card companies. Somebody, did you request a new credit card? Did you? Because we've closed your account and we sent a new card to El Salvador. And we're getting cash requests from Mexico and Tonga and Guatemala. Is that you? And I'm like, well, no, I've never been those places, and those are pretty far apart for you to be getting cash requests on the same day. So something is going on. And I should name the one credit card company. They've closed the same account. What is it now? 4 times, 5 times, and sent new cards out. Only 1 or 2 of which have made their way to us. But so as I was, it's a hassle because you have automatic payments and all that, and now I have to update it. Now I'm getting notices. Hey, what happened to your credit card? And then, bless his heart, my father-in-law does not have internet anymore at his house in California. And so I felt like I was back in the dark ages. But as I was looking through something to pay the other day, I was buying something, and I noticed this. This is the first time I've ever seen this, that you actually can pay in Bitcoin. So I assume maybe someday you'll be able to actually pay in gold again. But when I see that would come up, then I know that the financial apocalypse is clear, or is close. So here's an interesting story. This is something that happened while I was gone at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania in Indiana, Pennsylvania. Yes, there actually is a place called Indiana, Pennsylvania. They were actually in our league in high school. And just as an aside, I remember going up there my senior year. I was the varsity wrestling heavyweight. I know you would find that hard to believe. And I remember we're around weigh-in, and the heavyweight from Indiana high school came over, and he goes, hey, where's your guy's heavyweight? And I'm like, it's me. And he kind of went, okay. He kind of did that sort of half laugh, and it's like, okay. So, so I don't have a very warm remembrances of Indiana. But there's a college student, and it was a college class on Christianity. And in a college class on Christianity, he challenged the professor that he said there are only two genders, male and female. And she didn't like that, so she kicked him out of the class. Now, he's in his last semester, and this would prevent him from graduating. So after 18 days in exile, the president of IUP finally said, okay, you can come back to class. I just think this is indicative of where things are going, that free speech really doesn't mean free speech. This is a state institution, and you're not allowed to say what you think because there are these thought police out there. And so a bunch of these little weasel thought police got out together yesterday, and they had these rallies around America and elsewhere. They even had one in Tel Aviv where they were protesting guns and people having the right to bear arms. And I just find it kind of ironic. If you've ever been to Israel, the one thing you see all over the place are guns. I mean, you're on the bus and there's 12 people on the bus with M16s, and they're usually 18 or 19 years old. Every time you see a group of Jewish school children, there's usually one or two guys walking around with them when they're out playing soccer or whatever, carrying Uzis and other automatic weapons, not semi-automatic. So it's just kind of ironic that this is happening. And so here they are exercising their First Amendment right to take away the Second Amendment right of people, and there seems to be a connection. The most ironic display of protest took place in London, where they protested in favor of taking away guns for Americans, which I think they tried once before, and we had a little bit of a war about it called the Revolutionary War, and we won. So for the rest of the time that I'm going to talk today, I'm going to talk mostly about the Middle East and geopolitics. A couple of sort of parallel stories. We have this thing in Turkey that's going on in the Kurdish area of Afrin, falling to Turkey. And then there's also this Gatestone Institute article, Is the United Kingdom an Islamist Colony? I'll talk about that first. At the outset, I will say that I'll talk about him in a moment. John Bolton, who is the new national security advisor for the president. And as you might expect, anything that happens now everything's a big fight. Everything that happens, and I'm talking in the Christian community, everybody's fighting. They hate John Bolton. They love John Bolton. He's the greatest. He's the worst. He's a neocon. He's a neocon. He's great. He's smart. He's intelligent. The encouraging thing that I think about him is that John Bolton, for a number of years, has been the chairman of the Gatestone Institute. And I think the Gatestone Institute puts out some of the best thought out analysis of geopolitics and things going on in our culture and geopolitics out there. And they're not afraid to speak the truth about certain religions. I find that refreshing, and so that part I'm very encouraged about. And he's not the president anyway, so he's not going to be making the final decisions. But this thing in England, this is interesting. Now, in England, you cannot, you don't have free speech rights much anymore in England. The London police have now issued hate crime guidelines. And the warning in the Daily Wire and elsewhere was, you better think twice before you open your mouth. Now, what is a hate crime? Well, the London Metropolitan Police has a website, and on their website, they define hate crime. Hate crime comes in many different forms and strikes at the heart of communities. With your help, we can tackle those responsible for hate crime and keep London's vibrant communities safe. We're here and ready to help anyone who has been affected by someone else's prejudice, ignorance, or violence. I would think that they would start with violence first and Find out below how to spot a hate crime, report it, or get help, support, and advice both online and in your community. And it goes on. It talks about what is a hate crime. A hate crime is when someone commits a crime against you because of your disability, gender, identity, race, sexual orientation, religion, or any other perceived difference. It doesn't always include physical violence. Someone using offensive language towards you or harassing you because of who you are or who you think they are is also a crime. The same goes for someone posting abusive or offensive messages about you online. I get plenty of hate crimes committed against me in those YouTube comments, the ones that last sometimes for only 20 or 30 seconds before they're deleted. If it happens to you, you might be tempted to shrug it off, but if you tell us, we can investigate and stop it from getting worse, either by you or someone, for you or someone else. Now, I want to ask a question. The protest yesterday against guns in London, is that a hate crime? Because it's a belief that I have that you should be able to have the right to bear arms. And so, oh, you're losing the picture? It might be the way I have it plugged in. I don't know. Okay. So it is just a tad distracting. But so here's what they say. And I only bring this up because what's happening there is going to come here. It's inevitable that we're going to have these people wanting to bring these things to America. Excuse me. I have to be careful. I don't want to baptize the equipment that sits down here and go out in a blaze of glory. A hate crime is defined as any criminal offense which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a person's race or perceived race. Wait a minute. Perceived race. Okay. See, here we go. We've lost complete touch with the reality. Now you can pretend what you are in terms of race. Religion or perceived religion. I just noticed it. Sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation, disability or perceived disability, and any crime motivated by hostility or prejudice against a person who is transgender or perceived to be transgender. And I'm perceiving that the people that wrote this are idiots. That's what I'm perceiving, okay? And they have these reports that you can do this. I kind of went and I sort of clicked through the report thing, and I selected an area on the map, and it just said, probably somebody got a knock on the door like, hey, what are you doing here that's a hate crime? Somebody reported you from America. And but it said, no, we're not in London. You need to call the Essex police. Call 101. And there are these are some of the groups that are going along with working with the London police in developing these hate crime guidelines. So here's one, the LGBT plus community. It should be the perceived LGBT plus community, I guess. Here's another one called Tell Mama. This is, I'm sure you don't know where, here's just a little video that goes along with that.
What do? Our first goal is to provide a support service for victims through our team of trained and experienced caseworkers. Then, once a report has been made, we can gather information on the individual's case and help to coordinate with police if necessary. Finally, we record the data so it can be verified externally by academics, allowing us to map and measure hate crimes and attacks across the UK. As well as protecting and helping individuals, Tell Mama is a service for everyone, to strengthen our communities, to achieve a safer and more unified society together.
So this is from a Gatestone Institute article just yesterday by Judith Bergman, UK Islamization full speed ahead. It is virtually impossible for Islamophobia to be underreported in London. The UK is nothing if not clinically obsessed with Islamophobia. In 2016, London Mayor Sadiq Khan's Office for Policing and Crime announced it was spending £1.7 million of taxpayer money policing speech online. British police have even been taking lessons about Islam and Islamophobia from radical Islamist groups such as MEND. One of the most active MEND figures has said that he has love for Anwar al-Awlaki, an influential U.S.-born Islamic terrorist who was killed by a U.S. drone strike in Yemen in 2011. She goes on to say this: the UK is accelerating its Islamization at an ever-increasing speed. The desire of the British establishment to submit to Islam appears to be overwhelming. And another report I read this week was that in Britain, many crimes now are not being investigated at all because they're focused on this stuff. And so real crime is not being dealt with by the British police. They're understaffed. So they're going to take on more things, and it's going to make everything better, I guess. It's insane. And look, it's going to come here. I mean, you can see these little stormtrooper types out there protesting the Second Amendment, these 17-year-old kids who don't know anything, frankly. It's more of an indictment of our education system than it is about them having a point. I don't think they understand. I don't think they can think. And they're being used. They're being used by people. Listen, these massive rallies and everything are being well funded by a bunch of left-wing people. George Clooney, Oprah, Soros, whatever you want to call it. That kid, whatever his name is, that's everywhere now, David, whatever, who's hogging the airwaves, and I've seen, these interviews with him where every other word was the F word. Well, that's not accurate. It was every fourth word was the F word. And they're being used. They're pawns in this bigger scheme. And people know, so you should know that every time something like this happens now, there's going to be a push to mobilize to get rid of the Second Amendment. Unfortunately, right now we have a president in place who appears to pretty much support the Second Amendment, and the judges that he appoints are going to be supportive of Second Amendment rights, and they're not going to overturn it. And absent a constitutional amendment, I just don't think they're going to make much headway. What's going to happen is every time there's a big shooting, there's going to be a big push, and there's going to be a big push to try to take away guns or to reduce gun rights. And what's going to happen? More people are going to join the NRA, and more people are going to go buy guns because they know that the police cannot be everywhere. And you look at statistics, you look at what's going on in cities around the country, you look at what's going on in cities around the world, the police cannot keep up. We live in an increasingly, I think, violent world and culture, and so people are going to take steps to protect themselves. So that's where we are. So let's look at the Middle East and just some things that are happening there. There is this, starting about 60 days ago, Turkey began pushing down into northern Syria. Turkey has some concerns. Now, Turkey is Sunni Muslim. Erdogan seems to want to establish himself as the new sultan or caliph. He wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. I showed you maps last year that Turkish government websites were using of the area of Syria and Iraq, and you could see that the southern border of Turkey was moving down and taking over cities like Mosul and other places in northern, like Aleppo in northern Syria and Mosul in northern Iraq. Erdogan also has a problem with the Kurds. The Kurds are, I've mentioned this before, the largest ethnic group on the planet that does not have their own country. The Kurds view themselves as the second Israel, and there is a strong affinity for the Jewish state of Israel among the Kurds. They like Israel because Israel is a model for them about standing up and a people without a country turning into a people with a country. So there's a close sort of ideological relationship there. But Erdogan views the Kurds and some of their organizations as essentially terrorists. And they have committed terrorist acts in Turkey. Turkey is itself a conglomeration of different ethnic and religious groups. It is largely Sunni Muslim. It has been very evil in its conduct towards certain ethnic and religious minorities. It was back around the time that the Ottoman Empire during the time of World War I that the Turks went in and slaughtered, by most estimates, 1 to 2 million Armenian Christians. And I mean they slaughtered them, they tortured them, they crucified them. You can find the pictures of them online in many places. It was horrific what they did. They tried to wipe them out because they viewed them as a problem. The same thing is going on now with the Kurds. Turkey views them as a problem. So when Turkey decided that they felt that the Kurdish people were sort of encroaching, they were controlling northern Syria in many respects, and Turkey felt that this was leading them to push for the creation of a Kurdish state. In fact, there was a vote that took place, and they said, we want to establish a Kurdish state. But the U.S. has kind of withdrawn its support that it offered to the Kurds previously. We've kind of left them hanging out there on their own. And they're not all good people. You understand, we do things geopolitically sometimes with people that aren't really so good because there's a larger picture that people are trying to accomplish. Whether you agree with it or not, it's just the way it is. So in Turkey, they have finally, after 60 days of trying to take over Afrin, they have finally taken over Afrin. Here's a little report from the Voice of America about that.
Turkish-led forces entered central Afrin on Sunday, apparently unopposed, and quickly fanned across the city, raising Turkish flags. The capture of the northern enclave is vital in Turkey's effort to prevent the possibility of an independent Kurdish state in the future. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced the victory.
Most of the terrorists have already fled with tails between their legs. Our special forces and members of the Free Syrian Army are cleaning the remains and the traps they left behind.
Erdogan claims that Syrian Kurdish militia YPG is linked to the banned Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK. After Afrin, Turkish-backed militias plan to continue fighting Kurds elsewhere in Syria.
If God is willing, we are going to Manjib, and after Manjib toward Hasaka. We will follow the Kurds wherever, both the PKK and the YPG.
About 250,000 people have fled Afrin in recent days, moving south to territory still held by the Kurdish YPG militia or areas controlled by the Syrian government. The exodus continued Sunday amid plumes of smoke from exploded mines. Pro-Kurdish politicians and activists in Turkey called on the international community to condemn what they called Turkey's ethnic cleansing of Kurds in Syria.
We call on the United Nations, European Council, European Parliament, international coalition forces, Islamic countries, and the international community as a whole to take steps to immediately avert tragedy in Afrin and get concrete results, including withdrawal of all armed forces who entered Afrin.
Right groups say hundreds of civilians have been killed in the Turkish offensive, but Ankara denies targeting civilians. In the Syrian city of Kamishli, on the border with Turkey, Kurds protested the killing of civilians in Afrin and vowed to take back what they say is their ancestral land.
Even if the Turks stay in Afrin for 1,000 years, we will kick them out and take back our land because they don't own anything in it.
The U.S. support for the Kurdish YPG militia in an effort to oust Islamic State terrorists from their Syrian strongholds has caused a rift between Washington and Ankara. Zlatica Hogg, VOA News, Washington.
And I'll talk about that rift in a moment and what that happens. So what's happened in this Kurdish areas is that Turkey wants to wipe out the Kurds. Now, the interesting part about that is Turkey is largely Sunni Muslim. The Kurds are, guess which type of Islam? Sunni Islam. So Sunni Islam wants to wipe out the ethnic Kurds. Why? And they're trying to do this. They're trying to do this systematically. And there are a lot of, by the way, I have some friends that go to the what I would call Kurdistan, and they witness to people. They are discipling people. There are people coming to know the Lord in those communities, and they are severely persecuted. So you need to pray for those ministries that are doing that. You need to, if you can, support them. It's difficult to get a lot of information about it because, for example, I have been shared some pictures of groups of Kurdish believers who are meeting, in homes and that type of thing. And if you share those on social media, those people will be rounded up and killed, even by the Kurdish Sunni people. But why do the Turkish Sunni people hate the Kurdish Sunni people? And the reason is that there is this legend that goes back a long time that the Kurdish people are descended from jinns or genies, G-I-N-N-S or genies. So they're considered to be evil. They're considered to be mixed blood. Sort of like the one theory about Genesis 6 that there's this mixture of fallen angels and human blood, the Nephilim, if you will. So that same idea has been carried over to the Kurdish people, and so the Turkish people want to kill all the Kurds because I don't care if you're Sunni Muslim, you're descended from a genie, and genies are evil, and therefore it's important for us to kill you. That's just the way it is, and I don't think that it's going to change. But there was this support among, the U.S. gave a lot of support to the Kurds because they helped in the fight against the Islamic State. Now that the Islamic State has been, people say defeated, I think that's a misnomer. I just think they've been put on the run, and I think you can pretty much say with some confidence that they're going to start popping up in different places in the very near future. So that it's just, they're there and they're not going away. They haven't been killed, and a lot of times they've been given an opportunity to leave certain areas. I have video of large transports, open trucks full of Islamic State fighters being driven out of areas of Syria. I'm not driven out, but driven out like a big bus and taken other places. So this claim that the Islamic State has gone away is just absolute nonsense. Turkey also, and so there is a belief among Erdogan and others that they want to establish the caliphate. Now, I'm not sure how well they will be able to implement that. The fact is they believe it. You should take some encouragement from the fact that it's going to be difficult for Turkey to do that, at least presently, because it took them 60 days to take Afrin in Syria. And that's a small area. The force was kind of a loosely organized, asymmetric force, almost a homegrown army of people in Afrin, and they kept the Turkish army at bay for 60 days before the Turkish army came in. And the reason is that the Turkish army has the same problem that a lot of other armies do, is do you remember the Bill Cosby routine about the Revolutionary War? You know, you guys, you're supposed to, I think it was, you know, the difference is, okay, you guys will dress in animal skins and hide between rocks and trees. You British guys need to dress in red and march in a straight line. And so the difference is that there's a tremendous advantage to those who fight asymmetrical warfare, even though their numbers are smaller than these armies who come in and think that they're going to fight in a certain way. So the Turkish army is not, it is the largest armed forces in NATO after the United States. There's no other European country that has armed forces the size of Turkey. I believe they have 1,000 fighter jets. So they're not to be dismissed, but they may not be as good as they think. And remember, when Erdogan, it seems like this was 3 years ago. It was just about a year and a half ago that they had this coup attempt against Erdogan. Erdogan used that as an opportunity to come in and completely purge all of the leadership that he perceived to be anti-Erdogan out of the Turkish military. What happened was he removed a lot of the senior military leaders that knew how to do things. So since then, he has moved closer to Russia because he needs some support from Russia because he's gutted his military. He's gutted his government. He's gutted his educational establishment. It takes time to reconstitute that. So I think what happened in Afrin is indicative of the fact that Erdogan had to purge everybody out of his military that really knew everything, for the most part. So, but you know, he's still got a large force, and you can't dismiss him. And then there's this report. This was from back in December. This is a Turkish newspaper that's favorable to Erdogan. And essentially what they said was, this title translated is, if the Islamic army is established against who? Against Israel. And included in that article was this graphic right here, which shows the Islamic countries united, and these are Shia and Sunni countries united against who? That little country in the middle, the red, Israel. And this is what Erdogan really wants to do. So I'm not particularly concerned that there has been this rift between the United States and Turkey. I don't think they're to be trusted anyway, because Erdogan has long been trying to reestablish an Islamic Caliphate. And ever since he came to power about 15 years ago, it's clear to anyone who's been watching that this is what his goal is. He has done very similar to what Putin has done. There was a term limit for the prime minister, just like there was a term limit for, I don't even know what Putin is now. Is he the president or the prime minister? Whatever, there were term limits for whatever office Erdogan and Putin originally held. And what they did was they came in and they were very clever to essentially change the Constitution to give more power to the office that they didn't hold than they ran for that office. So Putin just got reelected to a 6-year term in his office, and essentially he's appears to be president for life. He's been in power now since he's been in power for a long time, about the same length of time as Erdogan, but you see some of the same tactics that Putin has used to consolidate his power has been used by Erdogan. And Putin now is, by some estimates, the richest person in the world. So he controls a lot of money. Erdogan, I think, would like to be more like Putin. He would like to be the Sultan. He would like to be the Caliph of a new Ottoman Empire, an Islamic Caliphate that would reestablish itself basically in these areas that it used to hold that it held for about 400 years, including controlling the land of what's now Israel. So it's very interesting. It's just, and it goes on into details. For example, we spend $174 billion in Islamic countries on military. Israel spends $15.6 billion. And then we have armed forces. we have down here in the lower right, we have 5.2 million, and Israel has 160,000, not counting reserves. And their goal, Erdogan's stated goal, and these things come out, people ignore it because they don't really want to deal with reality, is that Erdogan would like to lead the countries to wipe out Israel. Now that sounds, I don't like to beat the Ezekiel 38 and 39 horse every week, but it seems like every week there's more evidence that these things that the Bible predicted are becoming closer and closer to coming true. And here's just proof of it from an Erdogan supportive website newspaper in Turkey. Let's get the Islamic armies together and wipe out Israel. In Israel, things continue to have these terror attacks in the upper left-hand corner. There was 2 soldiers killed in a West Bank car ramming up in Samaria last week. In the old city, there was a stabbing of a man, and he died. And 2 of the soldiers died. In fact, in the car ramming in Samaria, the person, and we were at these checkpoints when we were in Israel last year, and this is why when you go through there, the soldiers are nervous. They're young kids. Young soldiers get killed at these checkpoints. They've been stabbed. That's why when you go to Hebron, they ask you, do you have any knives in your backpack? Because they have had soldiers stabbed at that checkpoint and killed at Hebron by the cave of Machpelah. When we were in, and I don't remember if I mentioned this last week in my update, when we were coming out of Nablus, we got stopped at a checkpoint. And there were a couple dozen, I would guess, Palestinian men there. Their trucks and cars had been stopped at the checkpoint. And our guy, Joel, decided he would drive up alongside the checkpoint, and then he would stop and he would try to talk to the soldiers to let us through the checkpoint. And when he went up there, the soldier said, we can't let you through the checkpoint. And Joel said, why? And the soldier said, well, because it's dangerous at Nablus. And he goes, well, we're Americans. If it's dangerous at Nablus, why can't we leave? Why are you keeping us in there? There's no hotels really in Nablus to speak of. It's not a place you really want to be at night. A lot of people don't want to be there during the day. But these Palestinian men, mostly young, were saying, just drive up there and just drive at them. Just drive at them. And I'm thinking that they were trying to encourage us to do a ramming attack. And I'm not so sure that they didn't want something to happen so that they could look at the soldiers. They killed those stupid American tourists that were just trying to leave Nablus. Now that I think back about it, and I think Pam and I have talked about it, and in hindsight, I think that's exactly what they were trying to do. So these people, the settler here on the right was killed. One of the soldiers' funerals down here in the lower left, and and these funerals happen all the time in Israel. It's just very, very disconcerting. The families. These are very close-knit, tight communities in these settlements, and this is a father of 4. And here from Israeli National News, 14 new Israeli orphans in 1 month from the terror killings that occurred. It's troubling. And then here's a boss. He seems to be on his way out. There's belief that he is ill, that he's not going to live that long. And so he's doubling down. He says, I don't want to go out a traitor. I'm going to do everything. So he gave this talk in Ramallah at the Palestinian Council, and said that he called Ambassador Friedman, David Friedman of the United States, the son of a dog. Now, I think probably there's a little bit lost in the translation there. I think it was the son of a female dog, and we know what he was really referring to. The other thing that's important is that this is from Debka File and some other websites, not covered that much by the mainstream media. To date, the United States has had two major air bases in the Middle East. One was the Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, in sort of southeastern Turkey, from which a lot of attacks were mounted against the Islamic State. It would also, the air base in Turkey would also be a good place from which an attack could be launched against Iran if somebody decided to launch an attack against Iran. But what the U.S. is doing right now is they are essentially liquidating those air bases and they are moving them to Saudi Arabia. That was part, I think, of why the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS as he's called, was in America this week, meeting with the president to discuss the establishment of a new air base in Saudi Arabia. The other air base that's being taken out is another one I think is very important, is Qatar. It is in this red area right here. This red area right here is Qatar. And it's very important because, you know, a very significant portion, close to 50% of the world's oil, these black areas, by the way, are all oil fields. You can see them going up into the Kurdish areas up here around Kirkuk and Arbil and other places. This very oil-rich area, and now it's a very narrow passage here through the Straits of Hormuz and then here past Qatar to get up into the areas where Kuwait and Iraq and other countries, and also Saudi Arabia, has to go through this passageway. Qatar is very important. So for a long time, we've had a very good relationship with Qatar, but now that relationship seems to be fraying. As a result, the United States is closing down, appears to be closing down its air base in Qatar. Now, Qatar is a Sunni Islamic state, but they have a very strong agreement with Iran, because between this red area here is the Pars gas field. I believe it is the largest natural gas field on planet Earth. It is shared by Qatar and Iran. They have a very significant economic interest in working together. Qatar has been one of the more active countries in funding things like the Muslim Brotherhood to destabilize other Arab governments. So there is essentially, in some respects, a state of war that's developing between Qatar and these other Gulf Arab states like Kuwait and particularly Saudi Arabia. I'm sure that that was on the topic. So now the report is, and you can see from this website here from Al Jazeera, or Al Arabiya, that Turkey appears to be in place to come in and take over the air base that we're leaving behind in Qatar when we move to Saudi Arabia. Whether that'll happen, I don't know, but it shows that there's a further rift between the United States and Turkey. And I think that part of what Turkey is trying to do is Turkey is trying to test the limits as to how far they can go. Turkey is part of NATO. There's an agreement in NATO that one NATO country won't attack another NATO country. So they're coming into Syria and pushing the envelope against the Kurds as much as possible to see if the United States would, attack Turkey. And so there's this little game that's going on right now. It is a very complicated thing that's going on in the Middle East. I do feel that it plays very much into Bible prophecy. At the same time this is going on, the UN Human Rights Council has now adopted another 5 additional anti-Israel resolutions just the other day. They adopted 2 with respect to Syria, where people are being slaughtered by, the dozens. And they adopted 1 against Myanmar, which is also killing a lot of people, and some cleansings that are going on there. And so the U.S. is now saying, look, this is yet another reason for us to withdraw from the UN. Prime Minister Netanyahu tweeted More resolutions detached from reality, the circus of the absurd that is called the Human Rights Council. It is time for them to change the name to the Council for Resolutions Against the Only Democracy in the Middle East. And I agree with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israel this week sort of unveiled one of the worst kept secrets of the last 10 or 11 years, which was, how did this nuclear reactor in Syria get destroyed back in September of 2007? Israel came out this week, released a lot of information. There were videos released, I'll show you those in just a moment, by the IDF. And the IDF said, our intelligence said that this was a nuclear reactor. It was being built with the assistance of North Koreans. We discovered it, and it was about ready to go live to produce weapons-grade plutonium. They don't know exactly where that plutonium was going to end up, but it was thought it might have gone back to North Korea. And it's a very interesting story as to what happened. And there was a timeline. And it was fairly controversial in Israel at the time, as Ehud Olmert was the prime minister at the time. Ehud Barak, I believe, was the defense minister. There was a lot of debate at the time, like, are we going to attack? Are we not going to attack? And they eventually decided to attack. And now that they've come out and revealed it, of course, now they're fighting over it. Oh, I get credit for it. No, I get credit for it. And so everybody's stepping up wanting credit for it. The Politico, the IDF has a website. You can go and look on the IDF website, Israeli Defense Force website, about what happened and the intel behind it. Politico magazine here in the United States has, I think, a very fascinating article. I'll just share a little bit about it. The guy that was the head of the Mossad is named Pardo. And so there were questions being asked, like, what is this? How did we miss this? Pardo's questions raised, and so Israel, this thing was built and ready to go live before they did anything about it. So in some respects, it was kind of an intelligence failure. But the head of the Mossad said, no, wait a minute, we're a little tiny Israel. Why didn't the CIA and the U.S. know about this reactor that was being built in Syria? And this reactor was just up the Euphrates River, a little bit to the north from Dar el-Zor, which is a very hot area right now, where I believe the United States bombed some Syrian army, Assad's army people, the other day because they were trying to cross the river and take over that area. It's an oil-rich area. And so they had built this reactor up there. You can see it here. This is the reactor building. This is the Euphrates River over here on the left. And so they need water for that. So there was a water system that was put together. So the head of Mossad said this in this article. Pardo's questions raise another. If one of the best intelligence communities in the world, and certainly the most formidable in the Middle East, could be fooled by North Koreans and Syrians, what might the CIA be missing? That could be true in Korea, in Iran, or almost anywhere else on earth. And so while we like to think that, and some people think that the CIA controls everything, they make mistakes. They're humans. So they missed it. Another part of the article, Dar el-Zur, the largest city in eastern Syria, could be captured in 2014 by ISIS forces and then held by the Islamic militants for more than 3 years. Just imagine if ISIS had gotten its hands on plutonium and other parts designed to construct nuclear bombs. Israel's action, a difficult decision by Olmert after he unsuccessfully asked President George W. Bush to bomb the building, prevented the world's most bloodthirsty terrorists from acquiring the world's most lethal weapons. And so here's a little video that was done back in the day by a nuclear. I showed this video about 250 miles north of Damascus. Dar el-Zor is just there to the right. The North Koreans had assisted the Syrians in building this building to disguise a nuclear reactor. And what they found out was, well, here, just let me read a little bit of the Politico article while you watch the video. Israeli intelligence saw the new dictator, that was Assad, he came to power in 2000, who had been working as an ophthalmologist in London, as having a borderline personality. an inexperienced man who could be tempted to act recklessly or adventurously. Because his aspirations could be lethal, and he sat on Israel's northeastern border, Amman commanders decided not to underestimate Assad. I had to explain to my people why I insisted on concerning ourselves with Syria, said a research head in the agency, retired Brigadier General Eli Ben Mar, because the top topics at that time had been Iran and its proxy force in Lebanon, Hezbollah. Israel fought a war against the Lebanese Shiite militia in the summer of 2006 that was notably frightening due to constant rain of rockets from Lebanon that compelled almost 1 million Israelis to descend to shelters and move temporarily to southern Israel. Ben Mar told us that there were clues in Israel's deep and constant monitoring of Syria. Ships arrived from Asia with no apparent purpose. Trucks moved toward the east. Israel's intelligence liaisons asked friendly services, including the CIA, if they had noticed anything of a nuclear nature in Syria. The answer was negative. Pardo's boss at the time, Meir Dagan, who was director of the Mossad from 2002 to 2011, he died 2 years ago, joined Chief of Staff Ashkenazi in asking Prime Minister Ariel Sharon for an extra budget specifically to look for a nuclear project in Syria. Amman's renowned Unit 8200 greatly increased its monitoring of all Syrian communications. And this article, you should really look it up, and it goes through to tell you how they did. So what happened was on the evening, I think it was just before midnight on September 5th, 2007, about 8 Israeli F-15 or F-15 and F-16 fighter jets took off loaded with about 18 tons of bombs and ammunitions, and they flew up the Mediterranean coast of Lebanon and Syria to the Turkish border. They then went across the Turkish border and then came and attacked this thing from the south. And they flew at an altitude of about 100 meters. They flew close to the ground. And there's pretty good proof, and I mean, this has been discussed for a long time, that what Israel did was they sent up one of their, I can't remember the number, it's a aircraft, it looks like an AWAC. And this is actual audio that you can hear in the background of the pilots communicating when they're attacking this reactor. And you'll see it blow up. This is video that was just released this week by the IDF. And they dropped about 18 tons of bomb. They destroyed it. One of the pilots, I've heard from some friends who talked to him, said that the explosion was so massive that they don't know what they hit, but they were afraid that they were not going to get out of there alive. There was also people on the ground that were able to go in and plant devices so that they would have precise targeting information on this nuclear reactor. It was a phenomenal operation once they figured out what was going on. Even the United States, after this happened, you can see the rockets coming in here, and then this massive explosion. What happened was, even after this happened, the United States, a senior intelligence official came out, and everything was pretty hush-hush, but everybody pretty much knew who did it, but nobody would admit it. And even Syria took steps to kind of hide what had happened. They came in with bulldozers, they put tarps over the building, the reactor core and that type of thing that had been there so that satellite pictures could not be taken. And Syrians really never admitted that they had anything there to this day. But the question is, what would have happened if this, and this is an article by Yaakov Katz, editor at the Jerusalem Post, about what would have happened if we had not done that in 2007. Well, it was only 5 or 6 years later that the Islamic State came in and took over that area. I mean, can you imagine what would have happened if the Islamic State actually had access to weapons-grade plutonium and the ability to make a bomb? Or they could have sold the plutonium and gotten a lot of money for it on the black market. It could have been bad. So Israel still faces this threat. This is Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking at AIPAC a couple weeks ago. Here's what he said.
Darkness is descending on our region. Iran is building an aggressive empire. Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, more to come. Now Iran is seeking to build permanent military bases in Syria, seeking to create a land bridge from Tartus, from Tehran to Tartus on the Mediterranean. And in addition to moving its army, its air force, its navy to Syria to be able to attack Israel from closer hand, it's also seeking to develop, to build precision-guided missile factories in Syria, in Lebanon, against Israel. I will not let that happen. We will not let that happen. We must stop Iran. We will stop Iran. Last week we read in the book of Esther about an earlier Persian attempt to exterminate our people. They failed then, they'll fail now. We will never let Iran develop nuclear weapons. Not now, not in 10 years, not ever.
It's interesting, you mentioned the book of Esther. Of course, they celebrate Purim, which was celebrated a couple weeks ago. And one of the teachings that some of the rabbis give about that is there's an Amalek, there's a Haman in every generation that's always trying to destroy the Jewish people. And it seems to bear out, it seems to be true, and we know prophetically that this is something that there's still people out there that want to do this. So let's just look at this real quickly. And John Bolton was appointed to replace McMaster. This has led to a huge fight. If you remember, he was appointed and was a recess appointment to be the ambassador to the UN back in the Bush administration. He could not get confirmed by Congress. There were people that absolutely hated John Bolton. One of the biggest, probably the senator, I think, that was most instrumental in stopping him from actually being confirmed as the ambassador to the UN was a guy named George Voinovich, senator from Ohio, a Republican senator, a rhino senator from, and I apologize to all rhinos who might be offended by referring to George Voinovich as a rhino. It's the only word that comes to mind, right? Well, that I can say. That can at the moment. So there's now just a feeding frenzy about John Bolton. Oh my goodness, John Bolton is being appointed National Security Advisor. Nuclear war is on the horizon. The guy at J Street, Jeremy Ben-Ami, the president of J Street, a dovish Jewish Middle Eastern policy lobby. That means they're a left-wing policy lobby for Israel, supposedly for Israel. Said this: "We are horrified by his selection to be National Security Advisor and believe by this move by the president gravely imperils our country's national standing and the fundamental security of the United States and its allies, including Israel." If you can unpack that and make sense of what Jeremy Ben-Ami means, feel free to send an email to Steve Mitchell. A editor at Foreign Policy, which is not exactly, it was more of a, well, they would call themselves centrists. A few thoughts on Bolton. He is not a neoconservative. He has little interest in exporting democracy or human rights or in restructuring other societies. He supported the Iraq War, but his preference was to withdraw soon after Saddam was ousted rather than engage in nation building. Foreign Policy, this is just a sort of a sampling of what was on the foreign policy page yesterday. Welcome to the Dick Cheney administration. John Bolton is a national security threat. Here's another article by Peter Fever. Give John Bolton a chance. And the other report, which I think I'm hearing a lot about this, is Bolton is expected to clean house. The word is that if you're a political appointee, if you're a holdover from the Obama administration and you're working in the National Security Administration agency, you start packing. because you're on your way out and you won't last. I think that would be very popular. At the same time, too, is Trump appointed a new guy for the head of the Center for Disease Control, and this is how foreign policy reacted. Meet Trump's new homophobic public health quack. You see how they engage in these ad hominem attacks against people that they don't like, they disagree with? I think I also saw that Trump is coming out with something on transgenders serving in the military. Even he's come out with something more on that. So I mean, look, I don't like. Pretty sure Trump is flawed. Let's just leave it at that. China and Russia. This is the head of SARCOM, Strategic Command, out in Nebraska. China and Russia are aggressively pursuing hypersonic weapons, and the United States cannot defend against them, the top nuclear commander says. And that's true. That it's something that I don't know that keeps me awake at night yet, but it's something that I think about quite a bit. It's he testified to that in Congress. And then Russia, at the same time that this is going on, Russia is coming out and saying through their top commanders and also from their foreign minister that the United States is preparing to take out Damascus. Now that has some prophetic implications. We know that this is something that's going to happen. We don't know exactly when. Let me close with one more thing, and I'll beat my time limit here. I'm not sure how to say this. There's a lot of time that's spent trying to identify who the Antichrist will be. I think Scripture clearly gives us a description in 2 Thessalonians 2 as to how he will be able to be identified. In the middle of the week, he goes into the temple that's been rebuilt and declares himself to be above all that is called God. It's called the abomination of desolation. Paul talks about it. Jesus talks about it. Daniel talked about it. It's a consistent theme through Scripture. Now, I know a lot of people think, oh, you can identify him by the peace treaty, the covenant that's confirmed. But I'm not so sure. Because there might be many peace treaties. There might be many covenants. I think Scripture clearly tells us how this revelation is going to take place in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. You may disagree. One of the people that people are talking about right now is Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of the president. Now, that raises the question, will the Antichrist have a security clearance? Because Jared Kushner no longer has a top secret security clearance. It was taken away. But there was just a couple interesting things. He had a conference last week. There's a readout. You can find it on the White House website, talking with Arab countries, Arab leaders. The only people that didn't show up really were the Palestinians, about what to do about Gaza. And there's just some interesting articles about this. Last week's conference, this is from Bloomberg, last week's conference embodied the success of the Kushner team's basic strategy and the challenge of making it work in the face of setbacks like Trump's Jerusalem announcement. In essence, Kushner has approached the Israeli-Palestinian question by treating it as an adjunct to a broader regional realignment of Sunni states plus Israel against Shiite Iran. His laser-like focus has been on Saudi Arabia, which is signaling that it is prepared to develop warm and even official ties to Israel if only peace can be established. The basic idea is for the Saudis and other Gulf states to pressure the Palestinians to the table. Then Trump and Kushner will deliver the Israelis, or at least try. Other negotiators in the past have sought to regionalize the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Kushner has gotten further than any of his predecessors on this front. It's an interesting assessment. His strategy has been to form an extremely close relationship with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is expected to become king in the near future when his father abdicates. This relationship is a two-way street. MBS, as the Saudi prince, is invariably called outside. MBS, as the Saudi prince is invariably called outside the country, is in the process of attempting a high-risk transformation of the Saudi monarchy from a power-sharing arrangement among siblings to centralized kingship dominated by one man. I just find all of this geopolitical maneuvering to be very interesting and very significant from a prophetic standpoint. For that, the article continues, MBS needs unprecedented personal backing from the White House, and Kushner and Trump have delivered exactly that. Witness their Oval Office meeting on Tuesday. Politico reported that recently Kushner took an unannounced trip to Saudi Arabia. He flew coach, by the way. I don't know if that's clandestine, if Jared Kushner is flying coach. That would seem to be what's going on. But one of the articles that said this is interesting. This is from Politico. The Trump administration has set its strategy as to try to draw on neighboring Arab leaders to play a role in Middle East peace. And then this statement. Jared has always been driven to try and solve the Palestinian dispute, said billionaire real estate investor Tom Barak, a longtime friend and close Trump confidant. The key to solving that dispute is Egypt, and the key to Egypt is Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia. Now, MBS has come out and said that he has Kushner in his pocket. He's been very clever. This is one of the, I'm not sure exactly, I can't remember exactly what his position was. He's one of the leaders of the Saudi armed forces, and he was one of those who was arrested back in November when MBS consolidated his power. Remember, he held the prime minister of Lebanon, Hariri, for almost a month. And the word is that he was able to get a payment from the Hariri family of about $7 billion into the Saudi government coffers in order for Hariri to be released and go back to Lebanon. This guy, and they did a piece on him on 60 Minutes last week, and it was pretty much a puff piece, and everybody's all excited about MBS and how he's changing Saudi Arabia, but I don't trust him. I think Saudi Arabia is a little bit on the weak side right now, and this is how they negotiate. When they're weak, they're your friend and everything. It's in the Quran. But this Saudi Arabian armed forces head, or one of the senior officials, was arrested and tortured to death. This guy is not somebody to be trivialized with. And so we see all of these nations aligning, I think, just as the Bible said. Now, exactly how this is going to all play out, we don't know yet. We're going to have to sit back and watch and pay attention. So let's pay attention, and let's go. So let's pray. Father, I just pray that you'll help us to take this information and to use it to impress on us the urgency of the times in which we live, that we will commit ourselves to sharing the gospel with others around us, and that we will support those who are at great risk to themselves going into these areas in Syria and Iraq and Turkey to share the gospel with people. Pray that you will protect them, watch over them, give them wisdom, give them the finances that they need. In Jesus' name, amen.